Stars
Podcast. This is the
Let me talk to you. This is such good shit.
Yes, we are here. We are here for another installment of the Five Starr Wrestling Report. Here on YouTube and Rumble each Monday and Friday for new material and new wrestling discussions and reports. Of course, if you're checking out the show for the first time, make sure to subscribe so you can stay posted with the channel going forward. Also, make sure to leave a comment and share your thoughts and opinions down below. And do me a favor too and give the video a like to help me out in the YouTube algorithms in particular. Got your standard Friday podcast for today. We're going to be going over AEW Dynamite, which was... well, it was Dynamite. What can you say at this point? I at least can say that I did not skip or fast forward through anything on the show this week, whereas... last week, I think the last 30 minutes, that was probably one of the worst last half hours of Dynamite that I can recall in recent memory. And I did, in fact, skip through the main event entirely. It still doesn't mean that everything I watched on this show was good either, but we'll get into it. We also have the continuation of our retro review series on NWA World Championship Wrestling and World Class Championship Wrestling. Some big stuff on the docket today, but I know you're all just foaming at the mouth to hear me rip into AEW first, so let's get that out of the way. And if you're archiving this, this is the March 30th, 2022 edition. And for the second straight week, AEW started with, basically the only redeeming quality about their show in the last 6 months, CM Punk. Fortunately for this week, he wasn't wrestling FTR. Instead, he wrestled Max Caster. And the most notable thing about the entire segment was Caster's opening rap, where he made sure to get in his timely media references on Will Smith, Chris Rock, and Hunter Biden. Also, I could be entirely wrong, but I think Caster also insinuated that he was going to beat the shit out of Punk so bad that he'd be wishing he was back on the Z-Packs. Clever. So I've talked about this before with the Acclaimed. I used to run pretty hot and cold with them a lot. Most of my complaints stemming from the problem of how inconsistently they've been booked on television, which is more of a Tony Khan issue than anything else. For as long as we've seen Caster and Bowens in matches now, it still feels like these guys are in no better shape from a booking standpoint than they were when they first showed up a couple years ago. There's been absolutely no progression or growth up the card with them as singles or tag wrestlers. And again, a lot of the problem here has to do with Tony's random bipolar booking mentality where he'll feature guys for a certain period of time, then he'll get bored with them and we won't see them for weeks, sometimes months. And then they randomly just show back up on the TV show again and all of a sudden we're supposed to care. It's the same thing I talked about with Lance Archer from Rampage this past week. If Caster and Bowens were frequently featured on TV in meaningful programs, or it actually felt like there was some kind of progression with them in the company, maybe I'd have gone into this with a little more interest. They're not a bad team. I've talked about it before. They're not necessarily my flavor when it comes to the kind of wrestling I enjoy. They're a little too over the top and Gen Z in their presentation for my taste. But Bowens has a great look. They seem to take their work seriously, and Caster's rap promos usually get a decent reaction from the crowd. But aside from a couple championship matches here and there, still feels like these guys are stuck in the same spot they were during the pandemic era of AEW. Now, that said, Caster working a singles match with Punk, I mean, that's a good way to give him a little more of a showcase spot. But we all know nothing's going to come out of this in the long term. Like, all it was designed to do is to give Punk a TV win, which, I mean, fine. I don't have a problem with that. But if I actually had any hope or vision that the Acclaimed were going to work some kind of short-term program with Punk and they were actually going to gain something out of it, I could maybe get behind them as a team a little more. Instead, I wouldn't be surprised if we don't see the Acclaim back on TV for another 3 weeks after this. I also really wasn't a fan of the finish, and I didn't think I'd imagine that coming from a CM Punk match, but Punk giving him the pile driver and then following it with tapping Caster out with the Anaconda device? Why exactly? Let's think about it for a minute. The pile driver is already supposed to be a deadly finisher in and of itself. The whole idea is a guy gets spiked on top of his head with his neck compressing in the process. Like, once upon a time, if you got hit with a pile driver, that was lights out. Sometimes even an injury angle. But, like, Punk hitting the pile driver and then following it up with tapping out Caster with a submission hold, and not even like a ref stoppage, but actually Caster tapping on the mat. I don't know, it just seemed like unnecessary overkill. Especially when it comes from an experienced vet like Punk. Like, I don't know, I thought he would have known better. All that said, I dug Punk's little promo afterwards with Tony Schiavone in the ring. If anything, I was thankful Punk actually let Tony hold the fucking mic for a change. And granted, he didn't say a whole lot, but, when he concluded by promising that by the end of 2022 he was going to be the world's champion, my immediate response was, he better fucking be. He better fucking be. So that was followed with MJF, FTR, and Smart Mark Sterling in the back for a promo. Why Sterling was there, I still have no idea. Aside from pinning up a few wanted posters of Wardlow, which, of course, we couldn't fucking see because everyone was blocking in the frame. The only thing that this is really designed to accomplish was to continue teasing the FTR face turn, which still feels really weird to me and completely out of the blue. Like, I get the idea is they're teasing the rematch with the Beta Bucks, who I think are still heels, last I checked. And the Pinnacle has sort of been irrelevant as a group since the War Games match with the Inner Circle last year, so maybe in their mind there's no sense of continuing the faction at this point. It's just so weird for me to picture FTR as baby faces. Have they actually ever had a run as baby faces where they were deliberately being booked as the good guys in the program? I'm sure there might have been a brief period in WWE where they had a run as good guys, but like, when I think about peak FTR or revival programs, I still think about the stuff they did with Ciampa and Gargano or Gable and Benjamin when they were heels. Or maybe it wasn't Benjamin, because that was main roster, right? Oh, God, who did Gable team with in NXT when they were doing the American Alpha thing? I can't believe I've already forgotten that kid's name. The one that had to retire because of all the concussion problems. Damn it, that's going to bother me now. Now I have to look him up. I got my Chrome tab here. Let me just type American Alpha. Oh, yeah, Jason Jordan. That's right. Anyway, what was I talking about here? I got totally sidetracked. Oh, yeah, that's right. I was going off about wondering why FTR are being leveraged as baby faces right now. I mean, I guess we'll see where it goes. there is a sort of sadistic part of me that wants to see that Bucks FTR rematch just because there's still that like underlying feeling in the pit of my stomach that Cash and Dax absolutely loathe those two fucking indie dweebs. And you know they've been fuming over that loss for a while now. And the question is, are the Bucks actually going to put FTR over it? Yeah, I couldn't even say that without laughing. So this is a real bitter pill to swallow. Jay Lethal wrestled Jon Moxley. You wrestled. Yeah, use that term loosely. It is Moxley we're talking about. I don't think the word wrestling actually exists in that guy's dictionary, especially when it comes to anything he does in the ring. When you look up windmill punches in wrestling, like the whole definition is just a picture of Jon Moxley doing fake-looking punches that barely look like they ever connect. And the reason I say this was bittersweet was that it involved Jay Lethal. And I love Jay Lethal. Just talked about that last week in the Adam Cole match. But like him trying to get a quality pro wrestling match out of Jon Moxley, dude, that's like pulling teeth. And watching this match, I can now confidently say that if there's one single chant that I can go the rest of my life without hearing, it's the "This is awesome" chant. Remember when you'd only hear that chant like maybe 3 or 4 times in a given year, and it actually occurred in matches where it called for it? What on earth was awesome about this match where that chant was warranted? Like, I know wrestling fans' standards are at the bottom of the barrel when it comes to what passes as good professional wrestling anymore, but I couldn't name a single awesome thing in this match. There were a couple good moments here and there, most of which came from Jay Lethal. I could tell you for certain that Moxley was his usual indie self here. Like there's a spot where Lethal comes off the ropes and gives him a takedown, and as Lethal goes up to the top rope, Mox proceeds to immediately spring to his feet like Superman, completely no-sells the move, and he hits Lethal with a perfectly executed superplex. All I said was, fuck off. I also think I don't need to go on another tangent about the fake forearm exchanges. You see them in every Moxley match, and they always look so stupid. Of course, Mox won with the paradigm shift, and then Lethal left all dejected and saddened. But hey, I'll at least give him this. At least we are actually seeing Jay Lethal on television. He's finally come out of hibernation from his cocoon from not being on the show in 8 consecutive months. And while I can't say I'm too keen on the story of Jay Lethal not being able to win the big one, at least it's something. And with AEW, that's about as high of a praise as you can give them. It's something I can temporarily sink my teeth into, evidently before they either ruin it entirely or drop it and we never hear about it again. Up next, we had FTR versus the Ass Boys, which up until the last couple of minutes was shaping up to be a pretty good match, believe it or not. Obviously, you can chalk that up to FTR being great workers and being able to carry the Gun Club. It was a good little bit of storytelling they were doing. You know, Austin and Colton are the two brash, smarky little prick kids going up against the two stern ring generals. You know, FTR were mostly in control early on until the breakdown spot right before the commercial. Billy Gunn absolutely wrecking Cash with that right fist. I mean, that probably got the biggest reaction of the entire fucking match. You don't want to talk about the man with the real hands of stone. Fuck Ronnie Garvin, bro. Billy Gunn's got that lethal blow. Of course, I should also mention that MJF was out there for commentary, but he actually didn't say a whole lot, other than referring to Aubrey as the worst official in wrestling history, which was pretty grand. And like I said, the match was going perfectly fine, right up until the Wardlow angle, and it completely went off the rails. So first off, Wardlow just shows up at the building unflanked by security. He's just storming through the hallway in the back. No one's chasing after him. No one's trying to hold him back. Nothing. Eventually, they do the incredibly stupid angle where they send the security goons to take the head-on collision punch from Wardlow, which always looks terrible. They all run at him in a single file line, and it's punch, block, repeat. He's totally out of the Hulk Hogan playbook, and it never looks good. So Wardlow kills all the fake security guys in the back, including trying to give one of them a powerbomb through a table, which of course didn't break. I laughed at that. So then Wardlow comes down the stairs to the crowd, signaling to MJF that from 6 miles away, he's about to come get his hands on him. Which immediately begs all sorts of questions, the first of which being, if Wardlow knew that MJF was out here on commentary for this match, why didn't he just come through the entrance tunnel where he had a clear pathway to MJF? Why did he have to come through the fans to try and make his way toward MJF when it was going to take him longer to get down there? Well, as it turns out, by the time the segment was over, we now know that Wardlow has an even bigger obstacle in his path than MJF. His biggest obstacle is a sea of fake indie geeks playing security. For the second straight week in a row, Wardlow was successfully thwarted by security in his attempt to get at MJF. No handcuffs, no pepper spray, no nightsticks, nothing to forcibly restrain Wardlow at all, aside from grabbing at his waist and holding him back. Wardlow was still unable to fend off these idiots. So that was dumb. Oh yeah, and I guess it should be noted that while all this bullshit's still going on, there's a professional wrestling match going on in the ring. I'll actually admit I completely forgot about that until JR reminded of it on commentary. So after Wardlow completely disappears and apparently was taken to Oz, FTR and the Guns do some more stuff for another 2 or 3 minutes. Billy Gunn ended up getting involved right in front of Aubrey, aka the worst official ever, so she did not call for the DQ. And why would she? It's AEW. One of the Gun kids got sent into Billy, knocked him off the apron, and then FTR hit the big rig for the pin. A total mess of a finish and a horribly booked angle with Wardlow that did nothing but make him look like the biggest lumbering buffoon in the history of the business. And wow, what a big fucking return for Wardlow after all of 7 days, right? Yeah, Silly Me to actually put stock in the idea that they were actually going to do something smart, like keeping Wardlow off of the show for a month, or build anticipation for the big return. Because God forbid we actually try to drum up some real heat in this feud. Nope, here he is, just casually strolling through the arena, trying to make a beeline for MJF in the most inefficient way imaginable. Not coming up through the entrance tunnel like a smart man would, but coming down through the crowd where he had to fend off a sea of people and security at the same time. And we're apparently supposed to be shocked that Wardlow was cut off in his tracks. That sucked. Speaking of suck, we had this Jericho Appreciation Society garbage skit. And I'll give them credit where it's due. If their mission is to do bad, low-rent sports entertainment television, well, they sure hit their mark this week, didn't they? So they're all backstage yucking it up, and they do the deal again where they all peek behind the side curtain to joke that Eddie Kingston, Santana, and Ortiz are not there. Oh, but hey, surprise. When you know it, turns out they were behind the curtain the whole time just to kickstart a brawl. Who didn't see that coming after last week? You know, when they did the exact same skit. And God, did I sure miss those AEW skits. The never-ending fake garbage brawl segment that spills out into the arena. Everyone breaks off into their own little packs. There's 100 million things going on all at once. Guys are tripping over one another left and right. And funny, isn't it? Security is right on target to hold back Wardlow and restrain him as soon as he comes into the arena. But in this particular brawl here that went on for 6 fucking years, no security to be found. Interesting. So after the babyfaces spend most of the segment beating the ever-loving shit out of the heels, of course they have to get their heat back. So Hager ends up walloping Santana and Ortiz after they tried to hit the Doomsday Powerbomb spot. The heels all gang up, and while Kingston's in a sharpshooter, Jericho starts whipping Kingston like 47 times with a baseball bat, which is about 46 times too many. I also think he whipped him with a belt, which was completely redundant and superfluous. And like I said at the beginning, bro, at least their gimmick now is that they are warning me ahead of time that their segments are going to be sports entertainment garbage. At least that way I can prep myself and stop giving a shit the moment I see them on camera. Well, admittedly so, I have not been too hot on Bryan Danielson lately, especially after the whole Mox affiliation. But knowing that he was going to go in there and wrestle a singles match this week, at least I knew that Mox wasn't going to be involved ahead of time. And by golly, isn't it amazing? You remove Wheeler Yuta from all the best friends horse shit and just let him go in there and be a serious pro wrestler for a change. He's much more enjoyable to watch. There's no Orange Cassidy, no Danhausen, no Chucklefuck Taylor, no goofy comedy or outlaw TV to be spoken of. Just 2 guys doing legit, serious professional wrestling with no bells and whistles. They worked body parts. They went back and forth with some really nice mat holds and submission work. I love the whole layout and structure of the match where Danielson went in basically blowing the whole thing off, but once Yuta started getting more aggressive and started actually taking the fight to Danielson, he got more serious and started laying it in more. The chops from Danielson to Yuta were just fucking fire. I'm also glad William Regal made sure to highlight the fact that they were more than just chops, but they were actual open palm strikes, which were far more deadly and fatal. And by the way, side note here, but Regal referring to Excalibur as Masked Man, just awesome. Don't hold back, Regal. Anything you can do to expose that idiot would be greatly merited. And I love the finish here, too, with Danielson setting up Yuta for a series of head stomps, but right before he laid in, Yuta spat up right in Danielson's face. It was perfect. And of course, he kills him with the Gotch pile driver and rubs it in with the LeBell lock when Yuta was already dead. And whereas from the Punk match, I was not a fan of him hitting the pile driver and then following it with another submission move, here it actually made sense. Because Yuta tried to disrespect Danielson with the spit in the face, so Danielson basically said, "All right, motherfucker, I'll show you disrespect." And he killed him with the pile driver, and just to make sure he got the message, he put him in the LeBell lock for more torture. At least it's something a heel would do. This is the kind of showcase match that I wish the Punk Caster match would have felt like. At least I can say this when it comes to Yuta. As much as the best friends are diarrheal explosion anytime I see him on TV, we've at least been exposed to them frequently enough on TV where I've gotten the chance to see them do some kind of character progression with Yuta. So, there's at least a sliver of good that came from watching the best friends get rammed up my sphincter for the last 3 years. So then we have this fake Undisputed Era Championship celebration. Could have sworn they did something very similar to this in NXT, except, they were actually the champions. And of course, as soon as they hyped this segment early on in the show, my first question immediately springs to mind. Why didn't Tony Khan force the heels to give the belts back last week? Better yet, I just thought of this. Why didn't Hangman Page or the Jurassic Express take action to get their belts back in the last week? What, they didn't care enough about their belts to threatened Cole and Red Dragon with a lawsuit if they did not return their stolen property. They just went the entire week and said, oh, well, too bad. Guess we'll just have to wait to get our titles back next time. Nothing we can do right now. Yeah, what great fucking babyface champions you guys turned out to be. And I should say it was very fitting here that they went with the cheap, low-rent celebratory decorations with the tape names over the belt plates and the 5 balloons from the cardboard box that said party supplies. Because I can tell you right now that if and when anyone in this group actually ever does become a champion in AEW, and this will be about the kind of reaction it'll get because of how royally Tony's fucked up all their booking. Look, I don't want to get hung up on this because it is entirely possible that he has a stutter or a speech impediment that's undocumented. But it's so hard to listen to Adam Cole's promos with that awkward stutter he does. And you hear it all the time. He's trying to say something and then he'll randomly just stammer trying to get out his line. Again, I don't know if it's nerves or subconscious. Like, he may not even be realizing he's doing it. Maybe, like I said, maybe it's a speech impediment. Whatever it is, it's really distracting. And, like, once you hear it, you just can't ever stop thinking about it when he's talking. You know, beyond Cole's promo, like, Red Dragon's promo wasn't any better. Like, O'Reilly pretending to be hungover from drinking too much champagne. Bobby Fish said something that just kind of went in one ear and out the other. And, of course, the whole setup going in was that Paige and the Jurassic Express were not at the building to claim their belts back. So what happens after all the bitching I just did about the faces having no incentive to get their belts back during the last week? Well, Paige and the Jurassic Express come out and they just take their belts back. Wow. What a story culmination. And what pussies the Undisputed Era turned out to be. Of course, when the beating is 4-on-3 advantage babyfaces, that's always a classic. That was a Russo classic from the TNA days. Almost as bad as having the babyfaces get the team advantage in the War Games match every year for like 5 straight years. So that whole segment was trash. Following that, we had Thunder Rosa out to, well, basically cut the promo that she tried to cut last week after the big title win. Wasn't the best delivery in the world, but you know, she's set on being the best women's champion and the best female athlete, not just in AEW, but the entire world. Which she pretty much already is, so I'm not sure what level of competition she's looking at. And the Bunny had a tournament qualifying match with the debuting Toni Storm of WWE fame. And God, was it horrible. And in completely unrelated news, I can now apparently pre-order my very own Malachi Black Micro Brawler at AEWshop.com. Hell of a time for product placement. A lot of people have been super high on Toni Storm for a long time. And I remember reading all the buzz when she first showed up in WWE. I think I even heard Dave Meltzer refer to her as like the best female wrestler in the world or something like that. Probably because she was in Japan at one point. I mean, she's not horrible, but I've seen a good handful of Toni Storm matches before. I never got what the big hype about her was. Now, granted, they put her in there with the fucking Bunny, so that probably wasn't getting her off on good footing. But the match went forever. It sucked. It was lifeless. Like, Toni sold for a good chunk of it, which was typical AEW stupidity when it comes to new debuting talent. Not to mention the crowd was dead for most of it. I should also point out, this was a qualifying match for a tournament that we know nothing about and have no information on. And that is coming directly from JR's mouth. So why am I supposed to care exactly? We had a Vicky Guerrero Nyla Rose segment where Vicky spoke, and I had no idea what she was saying because Tony was holding the mic too far away. And Nyla said something about genies, death wishes, and sounded more masculine than normal. Because, well, you know. And the main event was Darby Allin versus Andradio Italo. And as soon as they kickstart the thing with a 5-minute pre-match brawl where they're hitting every indie move in the book and going 100 miles an hour from the gate, you pretty much know what you're getting with this one. Once it got going, they had pretty much your standard fast-paced indie-level match. Darby got his ass kicked for most of it, which I guess made for a fine story, if you even want to call it that. But I've been over this 100,000 times now. Like, these kinds of matches are just not for me. They never have been. And I've been so down on Andrade for so long now. It's like anytime I see him in a segment on this show, I just groan. Like, whether it's a match, a promo, a pre-tape, it doesn't matter. Like, I'm over the whole Andrade thing, and I've been over it for a while now. Now, I do want to be fair, because I don't want to just go out and say that everything about this match is pure garbage. Like, the best spot in the whole thing was actually something I saw during the commercial in the split screen, where Andrade was holding Darby up over his shoulder and sort of like a reverse Canadian backbreaker hold. It actually looked like a bow and arrow, where like you'd see on the mat where Darby had his legs tucked under his arms and Andrade was stretching him back over his shoulder. That looked awesome, and like something you could probably only do with a guy Darby's size. And yeah, Darby's another example of someone I just haven't been all that high on recently. They had something good going with him when he was feuding with MJF late last year, but I mean, that was never really followed up well. That dude's been spinning his wheels in the mud for months now. As you know, with AEW, you can't have a match without ending in some form of mass chaos or pandemonium. So, of course, out comes Andrade's job squad to try and take out Sting on the outside. Somewhere in there, Andrade hit Darby with his double underhook DDT for the pin. And as the heels are ganging up on the faces afterwards, JR, ever the explicit announcer calling out all the stupid shit on this show, no shame, asks the very simple question, do we need to end every segment with a brawl or post-match attack? Wink, wink, nod, nod, Tony. And as it turns out, the only reason this was done was so they could play Jeff Hardy's theme so he could get the pop from the crowd. Because that's all wrestling is anymore. It's the initial pop reaction, and everything that happens afterwards is completely subordinate. They signed Jeff Hardy to a contract so they could buy the rights to his theme and get the cheap crowd pop for the entrance. And if you still think there's anything more to it than that, the Hardys are feuding with a bunch of undercard job guys. So fuck off, okay? Tony put as much thought into the Hardy Boys reunion as I did taking a piss when I got out of bed this morning. God, this show was all over the place this week. Believe it or not, this is a rarity for AEW, but I think for the first time in well over half a year, I might go on record by saying that CM Punk and MJF were not the best parts of the show. I got to give that one to Bryan Danielson and Wheeler Yuta this week. That was a great little TV match, purely based on the fact that it was just two guys having a wrestling match and didn't involve either guy's indie outlaw partners in any way. Yeah, but the other thing you have to look at, like bigger picture here, aside from the key takeaway of that really bad Wardlow MJF angle, what is the central story in this company right now? Like, Punk obviously has his sights set on the World Championship, but I can't imagine that's going to happen until way later in the year. Because I still think the eventual plan has to be to get the belt on MJF at some point. Which obviously means that they're going to have to go with MJF and Hangman Page. But the problem is Page is still in a meaningless program with Adam Cole right now, and I mean, MJF still technically has to blow off his feud with Wardlow, or at least they need to kickstart it in some way. So, like, with where they are right now in terms of booking, kind of feels like a lot of guys are just stuck in idling mode right now. Yeah, I know their next pay-per-view isn't for a couple months too, so I'm trying to figure out when they would start building up more of their top programs for that show. Like I said, the big feud right now is MJF and Wardlow. Probably soon to be Punk and MJF if Max wins the world title from Hangman Page soon. So that still has my intrigue. But beyond the whole world title picture, again, man, everyone just kind of feels like they're in lingering mode in the background with not a whole lot to do. Anyway, let's move on here to NWA World Championship Wrestling from March 29. And I wrote in my notes, March 29, 2022. This was not correct. I meant to say March 29, 1986. A little bit of a gaffe there. And we begin this week with, and I'm not kidding here, an interview from Worldwide Wrestling with Jimmy Valiant putting over, of all people, Pistol Pez Whatley as the best black athlete in the world. Major emphasis on the word black. And keep in mind, too, the last time we saw Pez Whatley on this show, I think it was the same day we landed on the moon. It's been a good 2 months since we've seen Pez on the show in any physical manner, be it a match or a promo segment. All the while, the big angle for this particular episode, discounting the Flair-Ricky Morton deal later on, pretty much all centered around Pez Whatley and a completely out-of-the-blue heel turn that occurred for unexplainable reasons. And at the point the show was over, the only thing we had to go on that led to Pez turning on Jimmy Valiant was that he called him the best black athlete in the world, which was highly comedic for reasons beyond the obvious. Anyone that's watched Pez Whatley on the show, what little we've seen of him, to use the phrase Pez Whatley and the best black athlete in the same sentence, it's a bit of a stretch. Let's just go with that. There was more to come with this later on. The opening match was Wahoo Mcdaniel versus Ron Rossi. Still calling him McDaniels after all these weeks. And as we've also established by now, Wahoo was wrestling here in his late 40s. So to say he was at limited capacity by this point in his career would probably be putting it lightly. He basically just did a bunch of holds and chops, and then he won with the same elbow smash that Valiant uses to win in his matches. I also love the concept that back in the day, it was entirely believable that a straight chop to the chest could be a viable finisher. We had Ronnie Garvin out for a promo. Yep, they're still trying to make that a thing. Putting the guy out there on live national television every week to mumble, bumble, and fumble his way through something resembling a professional wrestling promo. The only thing I wrote down here was that Garvin addresses the upcoming challenge against Ric Flair in the cage, and I think it counted about 4 or 5 awkward pauses where Garvin was either desperately trying to remember his lines or trying to construct coherent sentences. No good. We had a well-dressed Jim Cornette out for a promo, and by that I mean he was wearing a normal charcoal suit jacket. It was very weird. And for a corny promo, there actually wasn't a whole lot to write down about it. He was still making fun of the Road Warriors for graduating grade school several times over. Aside from that, he just took a minute to make the case that the Midnight Express are destined to win the 86 Crockett Cup. Of course, that dovetails right into the Midnight Express taking on Phil Brown and Willy Wilkins. I believe this is the 3rd straight match Phil Brown has wrestled against Condrey and Eaton. And I also laughed at Corny's unintentional racial slur against Brown here, where on live national television, Shivani and Crockett remind him that his last name is Brown, And Corny says, and I quote, "He sure is." Subtle. Also referring to Wilkins here as a disgrace to humanity and the world's largest midget. Yeah, I don't know about you all, but I think there's a case to be made that Cornette would be a great color commentator for AEW every week. No filter necessary. Beyond Cornette making overtly racial smears on live TV, it was the usual midnight domination. There was an incredibly head-scratching moment here where, I mean, there's really no other way to put it. Willie Wilkins went into business for himself. Ian and Condrey are spending like 5 minutes just beating the living shit out of this guy. And they do a spot where he gets dumped to the outside floor. And no less than 30 seconds afterwards, he climbs back up on the apron, completely no-sells the beating he's been taking, and he vaults himself over the top rope to do a standoff with Dennis in the ring. And the look on Condrey's face when he saw this guy leapfrog himself back into the ring, he was beyond baffled. Probably just thinking to himself, what the fuck is this idiot doing? So I don't know what that was all about. And then we had one of the oddest segments we've seen on NWA Studio Wrestling thus far. Pistol Pez Whatley was out to explain the Phantom heel turn on Worldwide. And he begins by holding up a pair of shears and a large chunk of hair that he had cut from Jimmy Valiant's head during the interview we saw in the opener. And while it's on my mind, because I know I'll probably forget if I don't mention it now, Pez Whatley doing a scathing heat promo while holding a pair of scissors precariously close to his jugular, might I suggest you don't do that. The amount of things that can go horribly wrong with that. So essentially, Pez tries to make a blank slate case that he got mad that Valiant called him the best black athlete, trying to insinuate that he's the best white, Chinese, and Japanese athlete at the same time, which was quite the statement. He called Valiant a hillbilly and a honky several times over. And that's about the point where they proceed to show the full footage of what happened, which again is why I just referred to this Phantom heel turn a minute ago. Because the whole story is, for absolutely no discernible reason, with absolutely no build-up or anticipation, as far as I can recollect, Pez Whatley just flipped to the dark side and turned on Valiant, all because of the fact that Valiant referred to Pez as a great black athlete. But I guess Pez was triggered by Valiant using the term black. Even though, well, you know, Pez is fucking black. Newsflash, I know. And this microaggression from Valiant was so harmful and so vile that Pez not only decked Valiant from behind and started pummeling the shit out of him, but he also cut off Jimmy's hair to add salt to injury. By the way, don't ask me why Pez just randomly had a pair of scissors in his tights for this interview. And, oh, there you go. That was the Pez Whatley heel turn of 1986. Also, they could pair him up with the Paul Jones Army down the road alongside the Baron and Tijo fucking Khan. We talk about it here in these retro recaps that things used to make sense when it came to booking and story development. I guess I should be more accurate by saying most things used to make sense and have logic to them. But there were definitely some outliers here and there. In the Pez Whatley heel turn of 1986, yeah, that was an outlier. And coming back from the break, we had Jimmy Valiant respond to said heel turn. And this was a very despondent Jimmy Valiant here. I believe for the first time since like 1971, 1972, we actually heard a shoot Jimmy Valiant promo where he was not a complete cartoon character. He had absolutely no words for what just occurred. He was devastated. He was flabbergasted, gobsmacked, totally caught off guard. He compared it to a situation that they actually had to bleep out on camera because Valiant actually dropped the F-bomb on live television, and because I'm good at reading lips, I was able to actually pick up on what he said. He said, it was like coming home and finding your wife fucking another man in bed. Yes, Pez Wadley turning his back on Jimmy Valiant was on par with a man finding his wife sleeping around with another man. Gotta say, if I was married, which I'm not, and happily never planned to be, I'd probably be more heartbroken that my best friend turned his back on me. The wife sleeping around with other men actually probably would not catch me off guard in the slightest. And you see it so often in 2022 because of the way the dating market is. Most of the time you don't even blink when you read a story like that. But the important thing here is that Jimmy still wants to reach out and help Pez because deep down, he knows Pez is a good man with a good heart. He's a troubled soul right now. Wow, what a class act from Jimmy Valiant. Even after having his hair forcibly ripped from his skull on live television, he still thinks Pez is a good guy. So we had Jimmy Garvin versus Don Turner, which was just a short squash with not a whole lot to note. We did have Precious paintbrushing Turner no less than 6 millimeters away from Pee Wee Anderson, but yeah, what are DQs in wrestling anyway? That was followed with Garvin and Precious at the booth to continue bad-mouthing and calling out Wahoo Mcdaniel for being a coward. Which, if you think about this whole story for more than 3 seconds, it's totally ridiculous on its face. The whole thing is Garvin claims that Wahoo's a coward because he won't confront him on the show. Meanwhile, Wahoo's been on the show for like 2 or 3 weeks now, as has Garvin, yet for some reason, Wahoo can't muster up the strength to just come out during Garvin's matches to confront him at the booth. I mean, it's not like he wouldn't have plenty of time to walk out there and get in his face. I mean, NWA squashes go 3 minutes minimum, unless it's a Magnum TA match. Yeah, here we are in like week 4 or 5 with the Wahoo McDaniel gorgeous Jimmy Garvin feud, and they still can't find a way to be in the same room at the same time. A likely story. Ivan Koloff wrestled Ray Traylor. There's an awesome 30-second moment in this match where Ray starts a short babyface comeback on Ivan. Of course, David Crockett's totally marking out for it. And as soon as Ivan cuts him off, David just goes, dadgummit. And yes, he actually says, dadgummit. Fucking epic. Now, with that said, it was still an Ivan Koloff match, which didn't necessarily mean it was bad, more so just uninspiring and dull. I will say, and I didn't notice it here, but I noticed it in the Koloff promo later on, Ivan appeared to have about 3 deep gashes in his forehead, which explained why he had the bandage in this match to cover it up. He looked like Abdullah the Butcher out there with how deep those cuts were. Disgusting. And also, it should be noted here that the finish saw Nikita decking Traylor with the Russian sickle behind Pee Wee's back so that Ivan could get the easy pinfall. Apparently, it was too daunting of a task for Ivan to get a clean fall over Ray Traylor in 1986. And that immediately bled into Magnum TA's 837 seething promo about wanting Nikita Koloff in the ring to fight for the U.S. heavyweight title. Yes, we're still talking about that. Up next, we had Nighthawk Coltrane attempt to cut a promo. And by that, I mostly mean he was out there to do his best Dave Meltzer impersonation by saying, every 3 seconds, and looking totally uncomfortable being out there in front of a camera. He informed us that he was concerned about Pez Wadley for some reason. Ronnie Garvin absolutely demolished Tony Zayn for about 3 hours, which was phenomenally great. Just stretching and mutilating that big tub of goo. I believe Zayn had bruises in about 6 different locations on his body since the last time I watched him wrestle, one of which ran almost the entire way up his leg toward the crotch area. I don't even want to know what happened. Now, all that said, why in the world this ass beating needed to run through a commercial break, I couldn't tell you. Although David Crockett laughing and enjoying Zayn getting massacred on television is pure entertainment value alone. I can say by now, and I know we still have like a year or so before Ronnie actually wins the NWA World Heavyweight title, but if it weren't for Ronnie going out there every week and just toying around with job guys and matches, I think I would be petitioning for them to fire Garvin entirely just because of how useless he is on the show when it comes to anything else. But I will admit there is something very appealing about watching Ronnie just fuck with dudes, slap them around for a while, and make them look like schmucks on TV. Like, if his matches sucked as bad as his promos did, I'd probably be skipping over most of his material every week. So, he's got some going for him. I can tell you who didn't suck at promos, though. Dusty Rhodes. Dusty was a hell of a promo in every way imaginable. Whether or not you knew what the guy was talking about. He began by either citing sources or talking about top sports critics, saying he would have considered competing in the NFL. What? He referenced being a wealthy man with all the girls, the best cars, and the best homes all across the land. And then he held up a bull rope and vowed pain and suffering on Arn Anderson and Tully Blanchard. And I think Baby Doll tried to get in a few words edgewise. Something about her wanting Dusty to break Arn's jaw instead of his leg so that he cannot run his mouth on the show every week. I liked Baby Doll better when she just stood there and smiled at the camera. We had the Horsemen out for a promo, which, I'll be completely honest with you, I zoned out during this thing. Mostly I was still trying to wrap my head around what Dusty was talking about in the previous segment. The only thing I noted here is that JJ made a reference about Baby Doll playing with Cabbage Patch Kids, which is probably a foreign language to Gen Zers now. And Arn also made reference to the 3 Horsemen as opposed to the 4 Horsemen, which was odd. You know, I had thought that Ole had come back to the NWA sometime in late 86 for a brief reunion with Arn, but perhaps my timeline could be a little bit off. I know by the following year, Lex Luger ended up getting factored into the equation, but hearing Arn drop the line about the 3 Horsemen kind of gives me the impression that Ole didn't come back for that brief run with the Horsemen like I thought he did. We had the Boss Magnum TA squashing Bob Owens with a belly-to-belly. And yes, we are apparently referring to him as the Boss. The real boss. Not Sasha Banks' artificial femme-power boss girl ring name. And then we had Magnum and Ronnie Garvin at the booth to put over the Crockett Cup. And yes, I should note here, by the way, prior to the announcement that Garvin would be replacing Dusty as Magnum's partner in the tournament, technically speaking, Magnum and Ronnie are still ranked the number 2 seed. Currently ranked above the Midnight Express, World Tag Champions, by the way, and the 4 Horsemen. And Magnum even explains in this very promo, me and Ronnie are not a real established team in the NWA. Yes, he really said that. I'm not kidding. Yet, somehow these guys were seeded second in the tournament overall. I call bullshit. Aside from that, the only other thing I wrote down was Ronnie completely butchering the name of the Jim Crockett Sr. Memorial Cup. he, let's just say he used some combination of those words in a sentence. Tully Blanchard versus Bill Tabb. Of course, 3 seconds into the match after the first lockup, and Tully's already complaining that Tabb grabbed a handful of hair. Because God forbid Tully needed to use mind game trickery against Bill fucking Tabb. Tully went with a slingshot, that's all I wrote down. Then we had one of the most gloriously but horrifically acted skits on the entire show. And yes, I wrote those exact words down. Precious was out at the booth with Tony by herself. And the first thing I wrote down was, oh boy. This was basically going to go one of two ways. It was going to be train wreck TV to the point of surpassing bad and becoming comically great. Or it was going to be so wretchedly bad with no redeeming qualities to consider. Nighthawk Coltrane level bad. I'll concede, I think it was a combination of both. The entire premise of the promo was that Precious kept calling Wahoo a coward because he didn't have the guts to come out and confront Jimmy Garvin one-on-one. So, of course, now is the point where Wahoo comes out and he gets into a face-off with Precious at the booth, where Precious begins to defame and run down Wahoo, making fun of his fake feathers and fake hat, claiming he's not a real Indian. She puts over about 4 or 5 times that if Jimmy was not busy right now, which he made sure to nod and wink at the camera, he'd be out here beating Wahoo's brains in, and she can't wait until the moment where they finally come face to face so Precious can cheer on her man beating the snot out of Wahoo in the middle of the ring. Then she sprays the air to part ways and just kind of walks past Wahoo. And I can say on one hand, the acting here was hideously bad, which it was, don't get me wrong. But let me tell you why I loved it. It was old school pro wrestling in every way imaginable. Meaning that it was the correct way to do male versus female dynamic confrontations in wrestling without completely burying the male wrestler at the expense of the female. Precious wasn't out there trying to be masculine Brandy Rhodes and get herself over at the expense of Wahoo. She was still her normal, feminine, smarky self. She put over her man, Gorgeous Jimmy, and when it was all done, the whole thing was still designed to advance the program between the two men. It wasn't designed to advance the feminine imperative social dominancy that's pushed in mainstream culture today. I'll even give a WWE example of this because I know it's easy to harp on AEW shitty booking all the time. Remember several years ago, God, maybe even longer than that at this point, whenever WWE was doing the whole authority angle on Raw with the McMahons, remember when Stephanie would be out there like every week on Raw just burying the male roster? Like saying they all suck, they all should be grateful for their jobs, they're all a bunch of worthless scrubs that should worship the ground that Stephanie walks on. Like, remember how that whole angle was completely fucking retarded? Because at no point in that story did anyone actually buy the idea that Stephanie was ever going to get her comeuppance for running down all the male athletes. All it did was make the men look inferior to Stephanie and her girl power. That's 21st century male-to-female dynamics when it comes to scripted television. Even if it makes absolutely no fucking sense in the world, we still have to paint the politically correct ideal that biological women are physically on the same level as biological men in combat sports. Which is why you saw segments like that on television. Look, who the fuck was Stephanie trying to get over by bashing the male wrestlers, beyond herself? The answer was no one. It was all to get herself over and try to artificially seed herself in the dominance hierarchy at the same level as the male athletes, regardless of where they were stationed on the card. The difference is that back in 1986, even when the women would try to belittle and shame the men on TV, at least you knew that the female valets were always trying to get over their man in the storyline instead of trying to hog the spotlight for themselves. Like, even when Baby Doll comes out and runs down the Horseman, she's still doing it with the purpose of ensuring that Dusty Rhodes is going to be the man to get the job done. Baby Doll is just the messenger. She's the mouthpiece. Because we all know Baby Doll isn't actually going to go in there and have a legit fight against Arn Anderson or Tully Blanchard or even J.J. Dillon. Now, if it were 2022, yeah, I would totally believe that they would try to artificialize something like having Baby Doll get into a physical altercation with men twice her size. Anything to pretend that men and women are blank slate equals, right? We had Ric Flair out next to, I'll try to bring some real alpha dominancy back to the show. He made some reference to the Final Four of a basketball tournament or something, and then brought it back around to talking about how the real Final Four was him and 3 other girls fucking in Daytona Beach. Now, whether this meant Flair fucking all 3 girls or all of them fucking each other at the same time, he didn't specify. Either way, it was still probably a good time for the Nature Boy. And he was about midway through his promo when he was talking about upcoming title defenses against Dusty and Ronnie when the Rock and Roll Express music played and just kind of drowned him out entirely. And that led into the Rock and Roll Express versus Art Pritz and Kent Glover match. And of course, Flair was at the booth the whole time, which was probably the only redeeming quality about it. He did once again make reference to Morton and Gibson's teeny bopper fans in training undergarments. Actually, you know what? Let me just read what I wrote down because I'm looking at this now. I'm actually kind of laughing at myself for how unintentionally funny this comes across in my notes because it's pretty much the best summary version I can give of NWA World Championship Wrestling in 1986. Like, if someone came up to me and asked me, okay, in like a short amount of words as humanly possible, describe NWA World Championship Wrestling on the Studio TBS Superstation. And off the cuff, my statement would probably be something along the lines like this. Ric Flair talks about fucking a bunch of girls, and the Rock and Roll Express won with a double drop kick. Seriously, how many segments on this show can I copy and paste that exact phrase with a segment involving Flair or the Rock and Roll Express on the same show? And this is where we had the big Flair-Morton face-off, which I talked about at the top of the report. And essentially, the confrontation between the two can be summed up as simple as Flair likes fucking big girls. I presume he meant big-breasted, mature women. While Morton is into the teeny boppers in training underwear, aka minors. So he reaches into his pocket and pulls out a training bra. He puts it on Morton's shoulder. Morton does a quick spout that Flair is a self-entitled, ungrateful prick. And while Flair is putting over the fact that he does not care whether the fans love him or hate him, Ricky pulls off Flair's shades mid-promo. He stomps them on the ground. Flair gives Morton a big slap across the face, and the two proceed to get into a big scuffle while Robert Gibson stood there being completely useless. Should also be noted that when Ricky slapped Ric Flair and Flair took the bump on the ground, his head came precariously close to hitting off the podium. That could have ended horribly. And on top of the great brawl that Flair and Morton were having, which did lead into the ring, David Crockett was in full babyface Mark mode the entire time. I especially laughed to the point where Ricky gave Flair the back body drop, and David screamed to the top of his lungs with excitement. The only way this would have been more perfect is if David was calling the action from the studio crowd in the front row so we could physically see him reacting on camera. I'm telling you, dude, David Crockett is the exact kind of color commentator we need on AEW Dynamite. Fuck Tony Schiavone and fuck Excalibur. Kick those two idiots out of there, put David in there with JR, and just let David call the action like a smark. Who am I kidding? David would be calling bullshit on most of that stuff anyway. Unless a segment involved him watching MJF get beat up every week, and David wouldn't know how to react to any of that stuff. Arn Anderson versus Dave Dellinger was next. It's for the TV title. Of course, David spent most of the match orgasming over the previous segment with Flair and Morton, which is kind of all I really paid attention to. Arn won with the Gourd Buster. This is where we had the Koloffs promo, and I had written down the comment about Ivan's deflated forehead from all the blade jobs. Mostly they just put over the Russian chain match and explained the rules of the match. The whole four-corner pad touch deal that I never liked. And then Nikita promised that he would choke Magnum until his head popped off, which was a pretty grotesque visual. Tony interviewed Wahoo Mcdaniel, where in some he threatened to basically beat up Precious if she ever stepped out of line again. It's a good babyface line right there. And then the Road Warriors absolutely decimated Larry Clark and Paul Garner in the best 60-second squash, with Animal absolutely decapitating one of the job guys with a Bradshaw-like clothesline from hell. It's even better watching it in slow-mo. And then it was capped with a great show-closing promo where Paul Ellering and the LOD made their case for why they're the number one top seed in the Crockett Cup, and if anyone wants to try and step up to prove them wrong, they can come get their asses kicked. I think I'll hedge my bets and say they're better off being ranked the number one top seed. I will take their word for it. Oh, and hey, look at that show-closing promo where no one got cut off for a change. This was, essentially a one, maybe two segment show overall. The Flair-Morton confrontation was all kinds of awesome, and the Pez-Wadley-Jimmy Valiant story was all kinds of inexplicable train wreck awesome. Beyond that, nothing to really write home about this week. David Crockett is still my spirit animal every time I watch these shows. I mean, it makes me crave a time in wrestling where commentary didn't suck, and the people calling the action were actually good at their jobs. It sucks, dude, but like even hearing Tony Schiavone and AEW calling the action, it's a whole different spectrum entirely when trying to compare it to him in even 1986 or like the latter days of WCW for that matter. I mean, it's safe to say, I think most people would probably agree that Schiavone was never a great play-by-play commentator to begin with. He was really bad in the dying days of WCW. But my God, dude, like, even hearing him as an AEW color guy, God, who was I listening to? It might have been Brian Last that just called him ineffectual. And that's probably the best accurate way I could sum it up. Because I don't think I've ever said that Tony was bad as a commentator in AEW, but ineffectual, useless, futile. Yeah, I could definitely agree with that. He adds nothing to the value of the show. He never has anything meaningful to say. It's not even comparable to his commentary back in the day. I really long for the Gorilla Monsoons and the Bobby Heenans and, even the Bill Mercers or the Bill Wattses of the world. I'll even take a Jim Ross when he had more life and energy. Whatever he's doing, phoning it in with AEW now, it's, again, not even comparable to Jim Ross's classic commentary. David and Tony on this show, like, they were such a perfect unit. It's a shame we just don't see chemistry like that in the business anymore. So moving along to World Class Championship Wrestling. Apparently the one match they had advertised from last week, that being the kendo stick match between the Great Kabuki and Toriatsu, well, they either postponed it for the following week, or they partook in blatant false advertising. Not that I was foaming at the mouth to see that match anyway. And, well, we'll get to the Kabuki thing in the main event because he did make his return on this very show. And let's just say if the goal was to build anticipation for the stick showdown between Kabuki and Yatsu, having Kabuki do a clean job in the main event probably wasn't the best booking idea in the world. Just throwing it out there. I also think it's safe to say that when your card for the night features a match with midgets, it's probably not going to be the most eventful night. Billy the Kid versus Little Coco was up first, and well, I think Bill Mercer summed it up perfectly. They're little. Thanks for the groundbreaking information, Bill. And I talked about this before because I think we've already seen maybe one or two midgets matches on world-class shows already. It's an acquired taste for a lot of people. You know, when it's done in moderation and it's not booked to be a complete and total farce, you know, like how Vince used to do it in WWF, it can actually be pretty enjoyable, particularly if the guys in there are good workers. Actually, you know, if you really want to draw an analogy for a modern day comparison, some people are going to throw rocks at me for this, but midgets matches in wrestling today are really not too different from the whole flashy, high-risk, no-sell gymnast garbage you see today. The only alteration is the height differential between the midgets and the modern talent. So by that, I mean like give or take 2 or 3 inches. But seriously, think about it. Like, this opening match was a fast-paced match. They did crowd-pleasing spots for a while. It was a total carny match, just done with smaller men. How different is it from a Beta Bucks match we see every week? I mean, if anything, I'd argue the stuff the midgets did here looked more believable because at least their shit looked like actual wrestling, not cooperative ballet dance class tricks. You know, the whole thing only went like 5 minutes, which is far and away more preferable than watching guys do similar style matches in today's era that go fucking 15 to 20 for no reason. So, Coco won with a flash pin, and then immediately bled into the next match, Killer Karl Krupp versus Mike Reed. And yes, for the record, a wrestler with the name Killer Karl Krupp, billed from Germany. You can put 2 and 2 together on that one. And I already knew very little about Krupp prior to the opening bell here, other than the fact that he was very popular throughout the 70s and actually had a pretty notable run in All Japan. He was definitely about 10 years my senior when it came to his peak years in the business. Looking at him with modern eyes, he was fucking horrible. With what little I knew about Krupp's character, I do know that he was a total cartoon character when it came to the whole persona thing. So, having not grown up watching him in his prime, I guess I just didn't have a natural appreciation for it like some of the latter cartoon characters in wrestling. But like I said, this is about another 5 minutes of torturous bad wrestling television. After that, we had the Freebirds doing an interview with Bill Mercer, beginning with Michael Hayes addressing the Go Home Freebirds chant by insinuating that he would like nothing more than to go home and fuck his wife, but in order for that to happen, someone has to send the Freebirds home in the first place. We had Terry Gordy here plucking at petals on a rose by saying they plan on taking out the competition in world class one step at a time, to which he then proceeds to rip off the entire rose, which I think was accidental because all 4 of them started laughing, including Bill Mercer. And the best part of the whole thing was right at the end where Buddy Roberts chimes in with one final jab at the Von Erichs, and right before they cut away, you can clearly see Buddy tripping over his chair trying to walk off camera. Classic. And that brought us to David Von Erich versus Buddy Roberts. And if there's one thing the show really needed by now, it was a match for the crowd to actually start giving a shit about. Even if it is another Von Erichs Freebirds pair-up. It's good stuff, though. Well-worked, logical pro wrestling with David controlling the action early on. Getting cut off ways with Buddy working him over on the mat in a couple holds. We did have a spot where Buddy tried to give David a double axe handle from the top rope, and in order for David to counter it, he grabbed a hold of Buddy's junk. We were told that this was a claw to the midsection. I beg to differ on that statement. It was apparent to me that David had a handful of Buddy's testicles. And the finish was perfectly timed, with David reversing the bulldog and hitting a running knee off the ropes for the pin. The one great thing about having Buddy in there to work with the Von Erichs is that they always had an easy outing to beat the Freebirds without ever taking any heat off of them. Obviously it would have been bad business to beat Hayes clean early, especially when he was notably one of the top guys in the food chain of that three-man team. Terry, he would do jobs occasionally, but it was usually Buddy that could take the fall, and that would always work out as the best fall decision. And, that's not to take anything away from him because, Buddy was a great ring general. It was clear that him and David were calling a lot of stuff in there with the rest holds, but, everything they did looked crisp and smooth. It's easy to look past a lot of Buddy's work with Hayes and Gordy in that trio, but he was a perfect fit for that group as the experienced veteran, especially right around the time the group formed. Because if y'all don't remember that story, the Freebirds were actually originally slated to be a regular team with Gordy and Roberts, because Bill Watts didn't think all that highly of Hayes' ring work when he first started because he was so green. But, because Buddy had been in the business long enough by that point, and he was a good enough ring general, Watts could trust putting all three of them together, with Buddy working more exclusively with Hayes to sort of teach him the ropes as he got more experience and more training. And whereas Buddy wasn't all that noted for being great on the stick, Hayes already had his grounds covered there because he was such a gifted promo from the jump. So, even though Gordy and Hayes get a lot of the credit for what made the Freebirds a successful team, don't forget how integral Buddy was in the progression of that team too. If you thought Buddy tripping over the chair in the pre-tape was legendary, how about Buddy completely eating shit trying to leave the ring after realizing the steps weren't set up against the ring? It's the kind of karma comedy that could only work with dirtbag heels. We had a series of rapid-fire interviews where a bunch of the roster was putting over the Iceman King Parsons, all of which were mostly putting him over until we got to the Freebirds, who I believe referred to him as being like a dog chasing after a parked car. Probably should not have found that as funny as I did, but I have a dark sense of humor, what can I say? By the way, I can also note here that when this segment was done, I can confidently conclude that I never need to see Kerry Von Erich attempt to dance on camera ever again. And our main event for the program was the Great Kabuki returning to action against the Iceman King Parsons, with a interesting little overlaying story being centered around Iceman's accumulation of big wins on world-class TV as of late. An undefeated streak, if you will. As a match, I would say that it was one of those matches where it started very slow and was starting to lean toward drearily boring. We had lots of nerve holds here from Kabuki, which also included several spots where he grabbed a hold of Iceman's man boobs and started clenching very tight. So on the show, we've seen nerve holds on a man's testicles and now on a man's breasts. Something tells me I made the right decision not getting into the wrestling business. I can imagine someone trying to call a spot in a match. All right, Tommy, here's the deal. You're going to start milking a comeback on me, but I'm going to cut you off. And I'm going to grab your ball sack, and then you can sell. And my response to that would be, you're going to grab my what now? Like I said, it was about 7 or 8 minutes of relatively standard boring wrestling, but it definitely picked up in the last 5 or so minutes once Iceman started making the comeback. Some really nice chops from Iceman in this match, along with a really good leaping dropkick actually toward the end there that really popped the crowd. Iceman ended up going over with the butt. Yes, that was actually how Mercer referred to it as. He kicked his butt out from under his butt. I did enjoy Iceman's promo afterwards where he promised he's going to continue to fight, win, and boogie. He also let us know that he's not bad, but bad people know not to mess with the Iceman. Which is a great line that I wish someone would actually use in the business today, because that would be a dynamite catchphrase. And in addition to the kendo stick match with Yatsu and Kabuki next week, which we are apparently getting for realsies, we are also apparently getting Flair and Kevin Von Erich for the NWA World Heavyweight Championship, which sounds like an awesome fucking show. Can't wait for that one. I smell a ruse, though, when it comes to that Flair-Kevin match. Guess we'll see if they actually pay that off. And overall, this wasn't a bad show. Once you get past the first 15 or so minutes, it's actually pretty enjoyable. It did feel like they were kind of buffering to build up for next week's show for the bigger deal, which is fine. And whereas last time Flair was advertised for an episode of World Class, it was not archived on the Peacock library. It does look like the April 9th episode is archived. So I will actually get to watch a Ric Flair match on World Class TV from 1983. And as we wrap this one up, make sure to tune back in for the Monday podcast. Big show coming up this weekend. I will be reviewing and running down WrestleMania. Both nights, in fact. And I will be strictly watching that show, not knowing any of the build or story development going in, because, in case it already wasn't obvious, I don't watch Raw or SmackDown. I will say, scouting over the card in the past week, that show looks like it'll rank somewhere on the spectrum from abysmally dull to downright fucking awful. I can say that anything on that show involving celebrities, I will have no idea who they are, what they star in, or what brought them to prominence. More importantly, I don't care. All I know right now is that as I scout over the wiki card here, sorry, I have it open in a tab somewhere. Oh, here it is. Guess it would be wise to kind of run down the card here real quick just to see what I'm going to be subjected to. Night 1, we have the following matches. Becky Lynch and Bianca Belair for the Raw Women's title, which has the potential to be good. I like Bianca, and Becky's done some good work in the last several years where she's kind of won me over. Rey and Dominic Mysterio versus Miz and Logan Paul. I have no idea who Logan Paul is, aside from the fact that apparently he's a social media personality. Drew McIntyre and Baron Corbin is a top-of-the-hour TV match that they're actually making me pay for, so that match can go fuck off. Usos versus Shinsuke Nakamura and Rick Boogs. I don't care. I also believe Rick Boogs is the guy from the Rumble that deadlifted and pressed up a bunch of dudes, but did nothing constructive beyond establishing the fact that he's strong and muscular. Can he actually wrestle worth the shit? I have no idea. New Day versus Sheamus and Ridge Holland. Again, looks like another TV match on a pay-per-view card. The Seth Rollins match is probably the one I'm most looking forward to, if anything, because it's against a mystery man who will probably turn out to be Cody Rhodes at this point. So that one at least has a little bit of intrigue going into it. And Charlotte versus Ronda Rousey for the SmackDown Women's title. Again, I could care less. Charlotte's fucking terrible. I've been over that a million times before. And I have not cared about anything Ronda's done in WWE since the Mania match with Kurt Hunter and Stephanie. And as far as night 2 goes, there's a multi-woman tag match for the belts that'll probably suck. Johnny Knoxville versus Sami Zayn is another celebrity match that I don't care about. Pat McAfee and Austin Theory could be good. I remember being thoroughly impressed with Pat's match he had with Adam Cole in NXT a couple years ago. I've been a big proponent of Austin Theory for a while now, so I expect that one to be good. RK Bro, Street Profits, and Alpha Academy for the Raw Tag Belts. I don't like multi-mans to begin with, but, WWE usually knows how to book multi-man matches right without them becoming complete and total clusterfucks. That one might have some fun action in it, but would I say it's a WrestleMania caliber match? Not really. Edge and AJ Styles. I've heard the build for that one has been the drizzling shits, and apparently Edge is a heel now for Christ knows what reason. But if I'm watching that one in a vacuum, they're both good workers where I can at least hold out hope that the match will be good. So that might be one of those programs where it's better that I haven't been paying attention to the TV shows, because if the build actually for that has been as bad as people say it has been, I probably would not have high expectations for that one going in. Bobby Lashley versus Omos. I could have sworn Lashley was out with surgery right now. Didn't he have a bad shoulder or something? And he's wrestling Omos? Oh, good fucking Lord. That sounds atrocious. What in the hell is Lashley supposed to get out of him? Has Omos actually worked a singles match in WWE yet? I don't mean like single match. No, like one-on-one singles match. Like last I remember, he was in a team with AJ where most of the time he just stood in the apron playing with himself and made very short, brief heat cutoffs here and there. And they're actually having this guy work a Mania match by himself against Lashley? Hope Lashley's getting a hell of a pay-per-view payout. He's going to need it. And the winner-take-all match with Brock Lesnar and Roman Reigns. Again, I haven't watched the TV shows. Apparently, this has been the best-built feud WWE has done in a long time, which it doesn't really surprise me with how great Roman's been since he came back and turned heel. But my God, dude, they're still at it with the Roman-Brock feud. How many times have we seen this match in the last 6 or 7 years now? And this would be like, what, the third Mania match they've had? Because the first one was what, 2014? 2015? That was the one where Seth ran in to cash in Money in the Bank at the end. The second one, I think, was a few years later where Brock won clean for no reason after all that build where it looked like they were actually going to finally pull the trigger on the Roman title win that nobody wanted to see. I think he ended up winning it like 5 months later at SummerSlam anyway, and the people still booed it out of the building. Look, I know the dynamics are different in this feud. The title unification is something that they've desperately needed to do for a long time now. So it'll probably feel fresher, having not seen the match in a few years, but Vince is obsessed with this program. It is his modern-day Rock-Austin feud. Certainly doesn't feel as big as the Rock-Austin rivalry, that's for sure. And I'm not going to do predictions or anything like that, because I don't care enough to take the time to do it. My interest overall is seeing if they actually debut Cody and how they pull off that Roman Brock match from night 2. I also know that there's apparently going to be a Kevin Owens show segment on one of the nights featuring Steve Austin. And that's actually had a little bit of a buzz too. So, if that's another thing they pay off, it'll be interesting to see what they actually do with it. But if I know WWE like I think I do, I would go on a limb here and predict that this ends up being one of the worst Mania shows in modern recorded history. As bad as, say, WrestleMania 9 or WrestleMania 11. I don't know about all that, but I don't know. Whichever Mania it was that they used to set up John Cena and The Rock for the next year, it was like, what, 2011, 2012? I'd have to go back and double check on that one. But the year before the first Cena Rock match, I remember that Mania being pretty dreadful too. This might stack up with that show. call me a skeptic, but I mean, dude, look at this card for more than 30 seconds. Would you be that hopeful? So that'll be an interesting Monday show. Definitely stop back, check it out, because we're also going to recap NWA Power and AEW Rampage. It'll definitely be a packed Monday episode. Until then, take care all. Peace.